Hey, everybody, welcome to the Streamlined Podcaster, a show that teaches you how to create a podcast that's worth listening to so you are not spinning your wheels. My name's Joe Casabona. I've been podcasting for 13 years, and today I want to talk to you about creating a voice memos podcast or a voice notes podcast. Recently, my good friend Becky Pearson Davidson went on Podcraft and talked about how beneficial her podcast has been to her. She says this on LinkedIn. I'll link it in the show notes. The podcast takes her 15 minutes a week and it's changing everything. She's made deeper connections with subscribers. She's nurtured leads to close more sales, and she's created more quality human content in less time. Shout out to Becky. She also gave me credit for this. I know I'm not the first person to do voice notes podcast, but I feel like I did bring it to our circle of friends. It was something that I tried doing as a private podcast at first, just like a lead magnet. And I realized that this content was really good. And I didn't want to just like put it behind a paywall. I wanted to create maximum impact. So I made it its own feed. And then eventually I just started making it as part of my kind of flagship show, Streamlined Solopreneur. So now those voice memos episodes show up in the same feed as my main podcast. They talk about pretty much the same thing. But today I want to talk to you about why you might want to do this and how you could go about doing it. So, why would you want to do a voice notes podcast in the first place? Well, my friend Luria Petrucci, who just knows so much about creating great video, talks about two different types of content, right? She talks about the thought leader content, which is the type of content that requires a video setup like the one I have, great lighting, it's maybe scripted or semi-scripted, and you are imparting wisdom in a very structured way. But then there's also the more relatable content, the seemingly casual, behind the scenes, imperfect content. And that's the stuff that nurtures and builds relationship. Becky talks about it for her Voice Memos podcast. Luria mentions that you need to do both if you want to build relationships. And a voice notes or voice memos podcast is a perfect way to do this. You are giving people raw, possibly unfiltered, definitely unpolished thoughts. And it feels like they're having more of a conversation with you. A podcast is already a great way to build connections because it is, I've always said, a more intimate medium, right? It is you in someone's headphones, most likely, and they are listening to you talk. But a voice notes podcast almost feels like a friend is calling you, and the connection is stronger. I've seen it on my show. Becky has seen it on her show. There's a reason why these are becoming, I would say, more popular. But the other reason is that producing a podcast is hard, especially now if you are trying to integrate video with your podcast. And a voice memos podcast is decidedly easier. So it feels like all upside, right? It's easier to produce. You don't need super expensive equipment, and you're forming a stronger bond with your audience. You could be like Becky and you're nurturing leads to close more sales. That sounds like a win-win-win. So let's talk about how to produce a voice memos podcast. First, you need a topic or a promise. This is true of every podcast, right? Your show needs to promise something to your audience. What problem are you solving for them? What are you telling them you're going to deliver? For Becky, it's about building memberships and communities. She's offering essentially like 5-minute tips on building a community. Super consumable and amazing for her audience. And then again, her audience is saying, hey, what you're talking about is great. Can you do it for me? My Voice Memos podcast gives you a behind the scenes look at what it's like running a solopreneur business while also being a super present father. there's a lot of challenges there, and I feel like there's not a lot of content for parents. And my voice memos deliver on that promise. Here's what I'm thinking about. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what it's like on a day where my kids are all sick and my wife's at work. Very relatable content. And honest to God, those episodes get way more feedback than my longer form episodes. So, what is your promise? Can you deliver that promise in 10 minutes or less? That's not a hard requirement, but that is something I think about because again, we don't want this content to get too long. We don't necessarily want it to drone on for a while. And if we're delivering these voice memos, like imagine if somebody sent you a 15-minute voicemail. I don't even know if you can do that, but you'd stop listening, right? So what is a promise that you can deliver in bite-sized content? Now, as far as gear goes, again, we want to make this as simple as possible. I strongly recommend the DJI mics. I've got one and I've got a pair. I find actually the pair sounds better than just the one I have. I'll have an affiliate link in the show notes, but these things are super portable. They plug right into the bottom of your phone and the audio quality is a lot better than just the built-in microphone. But the new phones have really good built-in microphones, but I like to pace. I like to walk, and having the portable microphone allows me to have a consistent sound quality even if I'm walking or moving around. So, I would strongly recommend the DJI mic. Rode has a similar one. There's a couple, right? That they just plug. There's a receiver that plugs into the bottom of your phone, and then a phone. That's it. A phone and and a microphone. That's all you need for this podcast. You could have an AI tool. I was using an AI tool for a while. I have stopped doing that because I was using it to like make the transcript and summarize and create a full on description. But I have found that like with a 5-minute podcast, have a good title and have a one-liner about what it's about. You don't want people to spend more time reading about the episode than listening to the episode. So I think whatever summary you have of those 5 to 10 minutes is fine. So those are really the two things you need. And then, of course, you need a voice recording app. If you have an iPhone, there's voice memos. If you have Android, I think there is I suspect that there's an equivalent. I also like whisper memos on the iPhone, or their super whisper. We want to keep it as simple as possible. I would just use the voice recording app on your phone. Voice memos on your iPhone definitely automatically transcribes now in newer versions of iOS. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Android version also does that. And you don't need the transcript per se, but I do like releasing the transcript of all of my episodes. So that's one less step that I would need to do as well with the voice memos app. Okay, so your phone, a DJI mic, a recording app. I like voice memos. The idea here also in getting a decent mic and keeping it short is we don't want to have to edit these episodes because editing turns it from raw, unfiltered, like a friend is leaving you a voicemail, to thought leader stuff. Because now you are shaping your message. And that is really important for full-length podcasts. Always edit your full-length episodes. But for things like this, where the purpose is different, I don't think you should edit them. Hosting. I'm going to recommend rss.com. It is very affordable. I am the evangelist for rss.com, so full disclosure there. But I also just think it's the best hosting for most people. It's easy to use. It works very well from your phone. And it has a lot of really great features for podcasters. So rss.com, big fan. I wouldn't be their evangelist if I wasn't. Also, there are like other, like we have rss.com, we have like dynamic ads now, but the feature set is really focused on creating a really good podcast. So I like RSS.com. Okay. Publishing your first episode. I think every podcast should have a trailer. And so I would recommend you do the trailer in the same format that you're going to do the episodes. You can maybe semi-script this because I think the trailer should follow a story. Why are you doing this? What's the show about? What are people going to get from it? How can they listen? And again, you can keep that to 1 to 2 minutes. So if you're launching a voice notes podcast separate, I still say have a trailer. If you're adding it onto your main show, I would just preamble the first voice notes episode with what this is and why it's different, and let me know if you like it. So that's publishing the first episode. And then you need all the stuff that a normal podcast needs. You need a title, make the title clear, have a tagline for who it helps, what problem it's solving, make some artwork. I think if it's a voice notes podcast, your face should be on it. It is you. People should get to know you. And then you need a description. I think podcast descriptions should read like movie synopses, where you agitate the problem or you set up the promise, and then you talk about how you're going to deliver on that promise. So that's it. That's everything you need to start a voice notes podcast. I also, one kind of like side tip here is, since I am releasing my voice notes podcast on my long form podcast feed, I like to append square brackets with, I call them Joe's audio notes. So I append audio note to the end of it. And I do have custom episode artwork that's called Joe's audio notes for those episodes to help them stand out a little bit more in podcast players, especially ones that support custom artwork, which I think most of them do now. Apple does, Spotify does, all the ones I do. So that's just kind of a side tip. If it's a strict like voice notes only podcast, you don't really need to do that. But if you're adding it to your long form, I like to make them stand out a little bit so people know immediately the type of episode they're getting. But that's it for this episode of Streamline Solopreneur. If you want to learn more, if you want help launching a voice notes podcast, I mean, you're listening to this show, so you probably don't need help. But if you do, I'll have a link in the description, or you can head over to casabona.org to get in touch. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, I hope you find some space in your week.